All right, let's dive into this one. The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. A guide to, well, spiritual enlightenment and ending suffering, all by just being present. Sounds simple, right? But it gets pretty deep.
It definitely does. The book starts by challenging the idea that you are your mind. That's a pretty fundamental assumption most of us have.
Yeah, for sure.
But Tolle says the mind is just a tool, not your actual identity.
Okay.
He says all that thinking, like the constant chatter, it actually obscures your true nature, this deeper self he calls being.
Being. Okay. So I'm guessing most of us haven't tapped into this being thing.
Right. And he uses this analogy, a beggar sitting on a box of gold.
Oh, I've heard that one before.
So the beggar is like most people, searching for happiness outside themselves, totally oblivious to the treasure they're literally sitting on.
Which is?
Their true being, their inner essence.
Got it. So that's where enlightenment comes in.
Exactly. And Tolle's point is it's not some superhuman feat, it's a natural state of being connected to that beingness. He calls it feeling realization.
Feeling realization. Interesting.
And he defines enlightenment as the end of suffering, which, makes you think, what's left when all the suffering is gone?
Right. What is that state?
Exactly. Now, the book then digs into consciousness as a way to get out of pain.
Yeah.
He introduces this idea of the pain body.
The pain body.
Yeah, basically it's like this accumulation of past emotional pain that can control your thoughts and actions.
Oh, I see that.
And to illustrate this, he shares his own personal awakening experience. He woke up one night filled with this intense dread.
Oh, wow.
But instead of resisting the feeling, he surrendered to it.
Surrendered to dread.
Yeah, and in that surrender, he experienced this profound stillness. And that's when he had this realization about the true nature of light.
So through surrendering to the pain, he found light.
Yeah, and this experience really highlights the power of being present, right here, right now. Being present is the key to dissolving that pain body and breaking free from suffering. It leads to his central premise. The only way to access that timeless realm of being is through the present moment. The past and future, he argues, are just mental constructs.
Okay, but our minds are, constantly pulling us out of the present.
Right, we resist the present moment. We're always thinking about something else.
So how do we break that pattern?
He says we need to withdraw our attention from the past and future. Easier said than done, I know.
For sure.
But when you can do that, there's this, lightness, this peace that comes with stepping outside of time.
I can imagine. So you're saying our minds actually have strategies to avoid the now?
Oh, absolutely. He calls it ordinary unconsciousness. He actually compares it to sleep.
Interesting.
He describes how the mind avoids the present through, waiting, seeking, and problem-making.
We're always waiting for something.
Exactly. He talks about waiting on two levels. There's, the small-scale waiting in traffic,
Right.
And then there's the big, large-scale waiting for a better job, a relationship, whatever it is.
So we're always living in this state of wanting something else.
Yeah.
Never satisfied with what is.
Yeah, and that keeps us trapped in a cycle of wanting, always looking ahead. But then he contrasts this with what he calls the waiting. It's a different kind of waiting.
Oh.
This waiting involves being alert, being present, and aware of what's happening right now.
So it's not about passively waiting, but actively being present.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we even begin to access this deeper reality?
Well, Tolle talks about portals, different ways to access that timeless realm of being. And one of them, surprisingly, is through the inner body.
The inner body. I'm not sure I follow.
So he guides you to focus on the feeling of the body from within, like you're letting go of the mental picture you have of it, the image.
So it's not thinking about the body, but feeling it.
Exactly. And that allows you to connect with a much deeper awareness. He also suggests other portals: silence, space, surrender, love.
Big concepts.
All gateways to the unmanifested. He calls it the unmanifested, the source of all creation. He even brings in the concept of chi, that life force energy, as the link between this unmanifested and the physical universe.
Sushi. Okay. So from the individual body to the universe. I'm seeing a theme here.
Definitely. And then he shifts focus to relationships. He says that romantic love, the way we typically experience it, can actually be a trap.
A trap.
He argues it's often a temporary escape from the ego's fear and incompleteness, and that can lead to addiction and suffering.
So how do we avoid that trap?
He says the key is to transform relationships by transcending the ego. which means letting go of judgment, accepting your partner as they are, reflecting back the love that you feel within.
That sounds really challenging, especially if the other person isn't on the same page.
Yeah, he acknowledges that. Being in a relationship with someone who's, unconscious while you're awakening can be very difficult.
Right, makes sense. So is he saying true peace in a relationship and in life ultimately comes from within, not from someone else?
That's exactly what he's saying.
Which brings us to, I think, one of the most profound points in the book, the idea that beyond happiness and unhappiness, there's peace.
Yeah, that's a big one. He's basically saying that true peace isn't the absence of negativity, but it's this deep stillness within you that doesn't get shaken no matter what's happening around you.
That's a hard concept to grasp. I think most of us associate happiness with peace.
It's definitely a shift in thinking. And he also talks about forgiveness as being crucial for finding that stillness.
Forgiveness, okay.
It involves recognizing that the past is essentially insubstantial and allowing the present moment to just be.
Okay, wow. We've covered a lot here. It's a lot to absorb.
It is, yeah. But Tolle says the path to enlightenment is actually simpler than we think.
Really?
One of the key takeaways, he says, is that it comes down to cultivating that present moment awareness, transcending the mind, and surrendering to the flow of life.
Surrender. That's a word we hear a lot in spiritual circles.
Yeah.
What does he actually mean by surrender?
He's very specific about what it's not. It's not giving up, it's not passive resignation, and it's not becoming inactive.
Okay, so what is it?
It's about yielding to the flow of life, accepting whatever this present moment brings without any conditions.
So it's about changing your perspective, not necessarily your actions.
Right. It's about letting go of that need for control that comes from the ego and trusting in a wisdom that's bigger than just your mind. It doesn't mean, becoming passive or letting people walk all over you. It's really about letting go of that inner resistance to what is.
So could you give me like a real world example of surrender? Like how would that play out?
Sure. Let's say you lose your job.
Okay, yeah.
Now, most people, their first reaction is going to be fear, worry, resentment, all of that.
Yeah, makes sense.
But surrender would be acknowledging the situation, accepting it. It doesn't mean you just, sit back and do nothing. You can still take action, look for a new job, but you're not adding to the suffering by resisting what is.
You're choosing how to respond instead of just reacting from that place of fear.
Right. Surrender actually allows you to access a deeper intelligence, more creativity. You can see things more clearly, respond more effectively.
Interesting. So how does this idea of surrender, how does it tie into finding God or, having that enlightenment experience that Tolle talks about?
Well, when you surrender, you're letting go of the ego's need to be in control. And that ego, with all its thinking and resistance, it's actually creating a barrier between you and your true self, that being we were talking about.
Okay, yeah.
So by surrendering, you're removing that barrier, allowing, the light of your true self to come through.
So it's about aligning with something bigger than yourself, bigger than that ego.
Exactly. Aligning with the flow of life, trusting in a wisdom that goes beyond just, the limited perspective of your mind.
I see. He also connects surrender to like the transformation of suffering. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Most people, they want to avoid pain at all costs.
Yeah, that's natural.
But Tolle's suggesting that true liberation comes from actually embracing suffering, surrendering to it.
Really?
Because when you resist pain, you're actually trapping it. But when you allow yourself to feel it, to accept it, then you create space for transformation.
So you're moving through the pain, not around it.
Exactly. And this process, this surrender, this acceptance, that's what leads to peace. Even in, difficult situations, he uses the example of the Stoic philosophers who, even when they were facing tragedy, they maintained that inner peace.
Right, right. It reminds me of what he was saying about how beyond happiness and unhappiness, there's peace.
Exactly. He's challenging this idea that happiness is the ultimate goal. True peace, it transcends both happiness and unhappiness. It's that stillness inside that isn't dependent on what's happening externally.
That's a pretty radical idea, especially, in our culture where everything's about happiness and pleasure.
Oh, absolutely. But he's saying true fulfillment doesn't come from chasing those fleeting pleasures. It comes from connecting with that timeless essence of being.
Right, right. He also talks about experiencing enlightenment through suffering. What does he mean by that?
He's acknowledging that for a lot of people, suffering is kind of necessary to, break down the ego's defenses and force them to surrender.
I can see that.
He calls this the way of the cross. It's like a path of awakening, but it's through pain and loss.
So it's like life forces you to surrender.
In a way, yeah. And he contrasts that with consciously choosing enlightenment, which is about cultivating that present moment awareness and surrendering to the flow of life without waiting for some kind of crisis to force you into it.
So it's like we have a choice. We can wait for life to force us to surrender, or we can choose it willingly.
Right. And it really depends on how much we question our own thinking, our habitual patterns of behavior. Are we willing to leave that comfort zone of what we know and embrace the uncertainty of, what's happening right now?
It seems like everything he's talking about really hinges on that present moment awareness.
Absolutely. It's the foundation for surrender, for transcending the ego, for experiencing true peace, and, ultimately for reaching enlightenment.
Okay, so let's recap a little. We explored surrender, understanding it as letting go of that inner resistance. We connected it to the transformation of suffering, how going through pain can actually lead to peace. And then lastly, we highlighted that present moment awareness as the key to unlocking, the power of the now.
And as we move into our final part of this deep dive, I want you to consider this. If time is an illusion, like Tolle says, what does that really mean for how you live your life?
Wow, some really powerful ideas in the power of now. What's been sticking with you through this deep dive?
Yeah, lots to unpack here. What about you? Anything in particular that's resonated?
I think that question you left us with at the end of the last part about time being an illusion, that one really got me thinking.
Right, right. If the past and future are just like mental constructs, what does that mean for, all the stuff we do in life, our goals, our plans?
Exactly. Does it all become meaningless if it's ultimately an illusion?
Well, Tully's not saying we should just abandon all planning, throw it all out the window. He's emphasizing that our real power lies in the present moment.
So it's about shifting our focus, not necessarily changing everything we do.
Yeah. When you're truly present, like your attention is fully in the sheet. Now, then all your actions, they just have this like deeper awareness behind them, more intention.
I see. It's like even simple things become more meaningful when you approach them with that kind of presence.
Exactly. It's about the quality of your actions, whether it's your work, your relationships, everything. It all improves when you're coming from that place of presence.
Makes sense. So how do we actually cultivate this present moment awareness in our daily lives?
Mm.
How do we put these teachings into practice?
Well, it starts with noticing where your attention is. Is it caught up in worries about the future? Regrets about the past? The key is to bring yourself back to the past, now to what you're experiencing right now. The sights, the sounds, your physical sensations, even your thoughts, just noticing them as they arise.
It's like remembering that beggar sitting on the box of gold.
Exactly.
Tolle wants us to actually open that box, explore what's inside, to realize that peace and joy we're all searching for, it's already here.
It's been great diving into all this with you.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the power of now. Hopefully it's given you some new insights and maybe inspired you to explore the book for yourself. Until next time, keep diving deep, keep exploring.